Okay, so welcome. Today we're starting with History of Life. We're going to do a large-scale review, and then next week we're going to do it in a little finer detail.
Years have elapsed.
And again, if you have questions, raise your hand, let me know. If something's not clear, let me know. Right? I mean, I'm paid to teach you, so if you're not learning, I need to fix that. So let me know. All right, so let's take a very broad overview. All right, so the universe, 13.7 billion years old. Okay, starts with a Big Bang. Stars start to form, and now we're still expanding, right? So everything's getting further and further away through time. Okay, and it took 400 million years or so to make the first sets of stars. Okay. The first stars produce more complex elements. So stars often have hydrogen, helium, right? What are we? We're mostly carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, that sort of thing. How do you get those? Well, you have fusion happening in stars, right? So the atoms that make up you were once deep inside stars being smushed together, okay? Well, how do they get into you? Well, the first stars, grew, and then finally some of them exploded as supernovae, and then those complex elements, not complex elements, complex elements then collapsed, and some formed our sun, and some formed a dust cloud around the sun, right? And some of that dust cloud, congealed and became the Earth. Okay. 4.53 billion years ago, the moon was formed. Right? Large object hit, and molten blob of Earth rock went off and starts orbiting us. Okay. Next, there's heavy bombardment. Okay, and so the Earth forms. There's also other junk floating around, and it keeps flying through and impacting. Okay, so now we still have some of this in the asteroid belt. Right? Used to be stuff like this all the time, okay? And it still does occasionally, and parts of it, hit other planetoids and joined up, and so it might have left the solar system, the gravitational pull. So there's a lot less of it now, but we still worry about asteroids and things like that. A few years ago, an asteroid came closer to us than the moon is, right? Very, very close, If we had had Apollo space equipment, then we could have flown out to the asteroid. It just missed us. Right, and if it hit us, it'd be a very, very bad day.
I watched Armageddon last night.
Good prepping for class.
Yeah.
Have you heard of Apophis?
Yeah, that's Apophis. Yeah. And so now we actually have various proposals out to survey the sky and see what's going to get us, because we don't actually know that very well yet. But we're getting there. Okay, and of course asteroids have played a big role. We'll talk about dinosaurs in a minute. So this matters. Almost as soon as, this duration, 4.1 to 3.8. Almost as soon as that stops, life appears. Okay? So when you stop sort of, not nuking the planet, but effectively, huge impacts melting the crust, there's life. Okay? And we'll talk later on about the various theories for how life evolved. Okay? How would you know life evolves then? How can you figure that out? What?
Carbon dating?
Sort of. So carbon dating is too young, but you can use similar dating of things that decay to figure out from early fossils how old they are. That's one way. One thing. Other ideas?
Molecular clocks.
Molecular clocks. What's a molecular clock?
That's kind of like an esoteric concept I don't fully understand, but it's basically you track the rate of evolution and genetic change.
Mm-hmm.
Try to extrapolate the data out of it.
Right. Exactly. So if you have kids, your kids are going to be slightly different from you, right? Because you have cells in your germline that are mutating. Okay. And so these mutations build up through time. Okay. And if they're neutral, if they're in sites that don't really matter in terms of selection, they don't affect the amino acids, then selection's not really acting on them very much. And so those can keep accumulating through time. Is if you can calibrate and figure out, after a million years, things are different by 0.1%. After things are different by 10%, maybe it's 10 million years different. Okay, so that sort of approach works. Now, of course, one problem with that is rates do change through time. You evolve or lose the ability to repair your DNA as well. Generation times change. Population sizes change, which changes the efficacy of selection. Okay, so these things can also all mess up the molecular clock. Let's give you some estimates. Yeah, good. Okay, and one of the things about also is, we don't have necessarily great fossils of like, look, I'm a little bacterium. Here's my DNA. You might have trace fossils of here's a smear of stuff that we know is produced by organic life, right? We don't have to just have the exact smear of hydrocarbons if we want to produce it by life forms. And so sort of trace fossils, like fossils of chemicals rather than sort of body form is an interesting way of getting information. Okay, and so we're going to get more about that in a few weeks. Okay, any questions?
Are these stromatolites?
Yeah. So on the right here are stromatolites. Some of the best early evidence we have are these objects called stromatolites. They look like mushrooms. It's this sort of skeleton secreted by bacteria, okay, that form these things that are used in photosynthesis. I think chemosynthesis too, I'm not sure. And so, they're among the earliest fossils we can look at. And people thought they were all extinct, but then I think Shark Bay in Australia still has some. Because they're still alive. You can go and find these things that haven't changed much for billions of years. Actually, and actually some freshwater lakes that have them too. It's kind of interesting. This stromatolite form. Just layers and layers of bacteria. Okay. Other questions? That's good. Okay, so then photosynthesis evolves. Okay. So why is this important? Aerobic activity, right? What does that mean?
The use of oxygen in biological processes.
Mm-hmm. Right, so this produces a lot of oxygen, right? And oxygen is very reactive, right? So think about things that you leave out, like, a piece of metal you leave outside, it's going to rust, right? What's happening? That's oxygen interacting with the metal, okay? Oxygen's breaking up things and connecting all the time, okay? So without life, there's not much oxygen in the atmosphere. Okay, there's actually some science fiction novel where people were in a spaceship going by Earth and said, "Oh, no life there because it has an oxygen atmosphere. Life can't evolve with oxygen." And kept, sailing by, right? Because oxygen is so reactive. Okay, and actually, soon after photosynthesis, we have the start of pollution, right? So this great oxidation event of all this oxygen being produced. Okay, and oxygen is so reactive, certain things can't live with oxygen. Okay, so you've heard of anaerobic bacteria. Right? You have things that will, in your jar of jam, if you don't seal it well, will start growing even though there's no oxygen and will kill you. Right? In tidal mud flats, if you go down deep enough, those things are producing sulfur, right? And those are hydrogen sulfide, and they're living there, and they have no oxygen to receive electrons, so they use hydrogen sulfide and things like that. Okay, so this whole world of life for which oxygen is toxic. Okay, in your bodies, you have enzymes that deal with repairing all these things that are broken by oxygen. Okay, and you're constantly rusting, basically, and things are repairing the rust. Okay, and so oxygen is a very dangerous thing that becomes super common because these selfish plants are producing it as waste product. Okay, and then later, we use it now with respiration, right, to help go the opposite way and burn through sugar and make energy, ATP, right? So, and plants do this too. So many things can go back the other way and get lots of energy, but at first, this is toxic. Okay. Another big thing, running glaciation, lots of ice over the Earth. So we think of ice ages as pretty recent things, right? Neanderthals, woolly mammoths, that sort of thing. But there have been periods of ice ages throughout the Earth's history. Okay, here's one of the biggest ones. Okay. One thing that's interesting is how long all this takes. All right, so remember the universe appears 13 billion years, Earth appears, 4.6 billion years, and then we start getting a divergence of archaea and eukaryotes versus eubacteria. If you know these terms, we're going to learn in a couple slides. Okay, and Then we have eukaryotes diverging from archaea. And all through that time period, life is still single-celled. Right? So life appears here. Life is single-celled all through here. Okay? So for most of the Earth's history, so first of all, life appears very quickly, which is cool. And life stays simple in terms of body size for a long, long, long time. One thing you wonder about is, why was that? Any ideas?
By simple, do you mean single cell?
Yep.
Repeat the question again. Sorry,
Sure.
sorry.
So, the long time period between life evolved here, life is single-celled all through here, right? And now I think of, a lot of the most complex life we see is multicellular, right? Multicellular things are going through and, sweeping up plankton, all these, small little things, right? You think it might be good to be big, right? There's only some selective advantage to being big, right? Even though, bacteria still kills many of us, right? But there's some advantage to being big, but why it takes so long to evolve that?
I don't know a great answer, except that it seems like a huge evolutionary step to merge two cells. To
Right.
Make something multicellular. I don't have a good answer for you, though, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, having to think through concepts and having trouble with it, that's good. That's when you're learning. Right?
It's just you've got to have some major change to occur, because if it's just dividing to a new form, essentially this is the same life form the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
It's you're talking about creating an entire new life form, which already took a long time and a lot to occur the first time. And these are splitting, but essentially if you go all the way back, the organism alive at the end is the same organism that you had before. They've been living this long. And now you've got to get to where they got to cooperate. And that cooperation is a major leap.
Right. Right. I mean, the cooperation thing. So first of all, just like the big step is, how do you work with signaling? So rather than living on your own, you have to talk to a neighboring cell. So that's hard to do, right? But the cooperation thing is an even bigger deal, right? So the cells in my hand are dead, right? They're still alive right now. They're not going to have any offspring. So if you have, a fertilized egg or, two cells, someone's going to be the hand, someone's going to be the gametes, right? Nobody wants to be stuck being the hand, right? If you can somehow outcompete your sibling and say, I'm going to be the gametes, you're not, any traits that allow you to do that will be passed on. Right? So there's always this tension between, who gets to reproduce, okay? And with us, there have been enough controls now to sort of settle down, right? My hand there's no variability. No one's hand ever produces offspring, right? So there's no variability for that. So actually in Tasmanian devils now, there's actually infectious cancer, where the cancer cells themselves hop from animal to animal and spread, right? So they came from mouth tissue. So now they're actually surviving, without having to go through the gamete phase and spreading. But that we know about that because that's so cool and so weird, even though it has horrible ecological implications, right? And so with us, it settled down. But for early life, you start having the first two cells hanging out together. How are you going to decide who becomes the gametes? Okay, that's a big step to figure out how that happens. Okay. So we talked about archaea and eukaryotes and eubacteria. And archaea is your term for next week. Right? But what do these mean? Right? Well, here is a very basic phylogeny. Okay? We're going to cover phylogenies later in the class, but the basic idea is you have an ancestor, you have a species living, right? And then a species splits into two species. And then one of those species splits again into two species. Okay? The thing is, this is a very highly stylized one, and of course there are many, many species splitting off from here. I want to show you the very basic part of it. Okay? Where are we on this plot? Eukaryotes, right? And here's a slightly expanded version. Right? So we're this gray boring thing here, and here are archaea and bacteria. Okay? And these show the history of what the splittings were. Okay? And this is still very new, so people are still working on this. There's actually some new theories that say that we're actually come out from inside archaea. As people, so scientists are still actively working on this area. Okay. Here's some comparison. So, circular chromosome, think of bacteria, like on an intro bio, they have circular chromosomes, so do archaea. Histones, so things in your DNA wrap your DNA around, help give it structure. We have that, and archaea have that. Okay. Flagella, and flagelliforms, unicellular, varies. Right? Organelles, generally no, yes. Okay, so these differences between these big, great three domains. Okay. Now, if you're learning biology, 20 years ago, or maybe even like in your elementary school when you were learning biology, you probably learned bacteria, eukaryotes, right? Because this whole archaea split, we didn't know about. We just grouped them part of bacteria. Okay, and the fact that they are actually more closely related to us than they are to bacteria was a new discovery. Okay, so here's a quick video about that.
In the discovery of the cell nucleus, it was believed there were two fundamental types of life on Earth: bacteria and everything else. Bacteria were classified as prokaryotes. These were simple, single-celled organisms with their DNA contained not within a nucleus, but by the cell wall. All other life forms were classified as eukaryotes. Their cells carried their DNA enclosed within the nucleus. But this simple classification system was in for a shock. In 1977, biologist Carl Woese was studying the genetic makeup of a methane-producing microbe when he realized it was different from any known bacteria. Its cell wall was unique. It produced unusual enzymes, and its genetic sequence was unlike anything he'd ever seen.
It became soon apparent within the scope of space of an hour that there was something, a third thing out there.
This was the moment of discovery. Carl Woese had found a third form of life, a group of single-celled organisms that he called archaea.
We used to think there were two primary kingdoms on this planet. Now we know there are three. That was the shift, big shift. Because all microbiology had been structured around the idea that all bacteria are fundamentally the same. Not in their details, but in their essence, their ancestry, and their basic cell organization. Here is something that every microbiologist and biologist firmly believed in, and it wasn't true. So it does make us smile, doesn't it? Yeah. Look what I found.
Everyone's wrong but me.
What he found was a life form able to live anywhere on the planet, including the most extreme environments. Some archaea even call this home, hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor. Temperatures here fluctuate wildly within just a few inches, going from freezing to a scorching 760 degrees Fahrenheit.
Remember, water here boils at
Archaea had
212.
also been found
Right?
living miles inside the Earth, thriving in lakes of acid where even iron minerals dissolve. Today, some biologists believe that archaea are the common ancestor from which eukaryotes evolved, and that includes you and me. For Carl Woese, the discovery of archaea remains a sweet memory.
It was picked up when published by the New York Times first, and the other newspapers, and then the TV came in. And I can remember walking outside of my house one night saying, when all this was happening, saying, tonight the world belongs to you.
So, I mean, it's 77, that's very recent, right? To have
More than a
discovered-
century after the
Oh,
discovery of the cell nucleus,
Oh, yeah.
it was believed there were two fundamental types of life on Earth:
It's not third by diversity.
bacteria and everything else.
Amazing what we still don't know.
Bacteria were
And the
classified
science
as
is all like that. As you dig in more, you'll
prokaryotes.
see Okay, you
These
think
were
you know this
simple,
about this.
single-celled
Actually, we're
organisms
still
with their
working on it,
DNA
still figuring out,
contained
like
not within a
I said,
nucleus,
are we
but by
from
the cell
an
wall.
archaea or archaea sister to us? Right? We still don't know that.
All
We're
other
still
life
trying to figure
forms
it
were
out.
classified as
Still lots of areas to
eukaryotes.
discover things.
Their cells carried their DNA enclosed within the nucleus.
Okay, any questions about that?
But this simple classification system was in for a shock.
So next we get the Ediacaran fauna, right? These sort of mats. Okay? We don't have any of these around anymore that we know of. Okay? And again, note the caveat. Right? Maybe in some bay in Australia there's some of these still living. Right? And we don't exactly know what they do. We don't know if they're photosynthetic or chemosynthetic. We see for these like mats on the seafloor. Okay? And then the Cambrian explosion. Okay? And here's where things start to get really cool features. Okay? We start getting things that, before this we had some sort of wormy things and things like this. Now things can swim. Okay? So not just like crawling through the substrate, now to be above the substrate. Okay? Now things evolve eyes. Right? So now all of a sudden you have these radiation detectors, right? They can detect electromagnetic waves. And like us, you can see things, you see electromagnetic waves. Right? Which is amazing, because now you don't have to just feel something coming towards you or smell it, you actually see it. Right? Amazing. You can detect things much more easily. Okay? You get hard parts. Okay? This animal is called Anomalocaris. This is one of your facts we're going to learn. It's like this meter-long thing that would swim along and be a predator and would grab things with these tentacles and then crush them with this sort of circular jaw. It's not really a jaw, but a circular structure, almost like a camera iris. Okay? When this was first discovered, people thought these are part of shrimp. This was a jellyfish, and this was something else. So then it was one organism all working together. Okay. And so very rapidly, you have this sort of arms race. You have things that when something can start to eat other things, then they evolve defenses, and it evolves counterattacks, and you get this arms race of complexity and sight and motion and hard parts and spines and this amazing thing. And so most of the phyla we have now, most of these major groups, arose at this point in the Cambrian. Okay. And then also, various cool. We'll talk about it more. Like one of these things is called hallucinogenia, right? Because scientists are describing it as like hallucinating. It looks very weird how it moves. Okay.
So when
Yeah.
did mitochondria and chloroplasts first evolve?
Mitochondria and chloroplasts were back with the origin of eukaryotes. Well, chloroplasts were a little later than that. Yeah, and so we're going to talk about this in a little while with endosymbiosis, but basically the idea is that what happens was an archaean was eating some bacteria and forgot to digest it all the way, right? And so the mitochondria living inside you actually have DNA, and the DNA is more closely related to bacteria than they are to archaea or are to you, okay? And so this idea proposed first by Lynn Margulis, and people thought she was absolutely crazy, right? So you have your mitochondria or chloroplasts are just lunch that someone forgot to eat and just persisted for a billion years, or not quite a billion years, but less than that, but hundreds of millions of years. And more and more evidence shows that yep, that's what happened. Your mitochondria actually living, little bacteria living inside you that divide, and also became increasingly under host control and lost most of their genes. Chloroplasts, same thing. And actually with chloroplasts it's interesting because certain protists, which are a miscellaneous group of eukaryotes, have actually gotten the ability to photosynthesize by eating other protists. Okay, and the way you can tell this is their chloroplasts will have layers and layers and layers of cell membranes. Every time you eat something, so here's my happy little Pac-Man cell, right? And here's my yummy, protochloroplast, right? When I eat it, I pull in, and then we get something like this, right? So I have host membrane around it. And now someone else comes and eats that one, and now we have this membrane and then this membrane, and so forth. And so you can sort of track how many times things have been eaten and passed from one thing to another thing. It's kind of amazing that, the ability of photosynthesis has been passed around by eating other things. we'll get back to that later too. But just cool to think about. And then, again, there's evidence for this in not just the number of membranes, but things like the DNA structure and the sequence of the DNA. Okay. And so we see, this spiraling up of life, right? We are over here in various eras here, and we'll talk about those more on Monday. Okay, what happened in each of those. Another big event, the Permian-Triassic extinction. Okay? So here's a Permian animal that was adapted for eating ammonites. Okay, swimming ammonites, these are large ammonites. And then, most things went extinct. Okay, so up to 99% of life went extinct. So this is known as the time like life almost life disappeared, right?
What percentage?
99. Yeah. So you are descendants of the 1%. Think like Occupy Permian, right?
Was it a drought, or was this
We don't know. Yeah, that's a cool thing. I mean, this is a huge event that could have wiped out all of life. And we have various theories of what could have happened. It could have been an anoxic event, so running out of oxygen. It could be excess release of CO2 from like the ocean sort of burping up extra CO2 that had been settling with acidification. It could have been extraterrestrial like bolide, rock from outer space impact. It could have been climate change from biogeography changing how the continents are. With most of these things, it's often not a single event. It's often a complex of things, but we're still working on figuring out why that happened. Yeah.
I saw a TED talk that said it might not even be the Permian-Triassic extinction, but it said there was perhaps there was a bacterial silting method that occurred, and bacteria just kind of developed very strongly, kind of just wiped out a lot of life. Couldn't deal with it.
I mean, I haven't heard that theory, but I mean, there's lots of evidence of like invasive species or species suddenly getting a new ability, right? So we see here, we have like zebra mussels going into the Great Lakes, or we have lampreys going to the Great Lakes and wiping out many species. We have humans. We evolved in Africa, right? And everywhere else we went, all the large megafauna died, right? We came to America. All the mammoths die, all the ground sloths die, all the cave bears die. We go to New Zealand, all the moas, these giant, cool, like ostriches, but really cool, big jaw things. They go because we eat their eggs. So everywhere we go, we wipe out these things, right? And so you can imagine, a similar thing with the disease, where bacteria could evolve and wipe things out. But yeah, I haven't heard that before. Yeah, and we'll talk about invasive species more later this semester too. That's great. Okay, so the KT extinction, we actually have a pretty good idea of what happened here. And here it was giant rock from space landing at near the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Right? You need to have an idea of which angle it came at from looking at the crater and also looking at where the sedimentation was most common. Okay, there's an idea that was that was crazy right, when it first came out. But then more and more evidence accumulated that supports that this is what actually happened. Okay, and this wiped out many large animals. For example, it wiped out the dinosaurs, except for the dinosaurs that evolved into birds. Because the birds are still actually, if you want to know what dinosaur tastes like, it tastes like chicken, because chicken's a dinosaur. Right? So those persisted. Some mammals persisted, obviously. Right? That's us. Various other groups disappeared. Okay. But this was not nearly as bad as the Permian-Triassic extinction. Okay, it didn't kill nearly as much life. So I think it was like 70%. Still isn't a great amount of life to kill, but not nearly as bad as almost all. Right? Okay. What happens next? Well, in the long term, the sun is going to become a red giant. Okay, and expand. And so, yeah, you are here. So it's not clear yet whether the sun will be expanding so much that the Earth will be inside the sun, or just so much that we're just burning up but not quite inside. Either way, there's a clock on us, right? So we have about 1 billion years before life goes extinct on the planet. Okay? And so you think about, life evolves way back here, we have all this single cell life, and then multicellular life for a little bit, and now we have another, twice as long multicellular life, presumably, and then, right? So you already need justification for a manned space program. And there you go. Okay, so it's interesting to see what's happening next. And of course, who knows what the details will be along that path, right?
What species would it actually be that left this planet also?
Right. Yep. Yeah, will our descendants be around? Will it be giant intelligent cephalopods? That's my bet, but yeah, we'll see. So now for class discussion. How might a major extinction, like the one at the end of the Permian, affect life? Right, so if we had this sort of thing happening now, what would happen? So what we're going to do is, in small groups of 2 or 3, start talking about it, and then we'll come back together as a group and all exchange ideas. Okay?
We'd be done.